Let me see. And we're live. Let me see. I'm just waiting for it to pop up on Face. Okay, there we go. Let me just share it on my page.
Is it in the page or the group? Oh, there we are.
It's in the group. Yeah, you should be able to see it already.
Yes, I can. Awesome.
And we're good to go. How's it going, Ben?
Good. How are you, Jesus?
Pretty well, man. I want to introduce Ben Yennie, who's a producer rep to the community. He's the writer of Gorilla Rep, American Film Market Success on No Budget, and also the owner of Production X. And Ben, I would love to just start an introduction, man. Why are you in this crazy business, and how did you get into this crazy business? I know that you have a background in education as far as international business, and just let us know how you got into this point. What was that journey like to get to this point right now? Becoming a producer rep.
Hey, so yeah, actually, I don't have a background in international business. I went to film school in Colorado, and I just found that I have a knack for business, and I've done a lot of self-education on that, and that is a lot of how I ended up where I am. But in general, after I went to film school in Colorado, I followed a girl out here to San Francisco, and I found I liked the city better than the girl. Along the way, I started to go to the American film market, and after I went to the American film market, for a while, I found that I was better at the business side of film distribution, film finance, and those things than I was at producing films. And there are a lot fewer people who are good at distribution, finance, and marketing than there are people who are good at distributing or at producing films. So I respecialized and became a producer's rep, and then wrote the book on film markets. So yeah.
And that was your first experience, right? Did you write the book right after that first,
No, I'd been going for about 4 years when I wrote the book.
So you already were like, a veteran of AFM and, building relationships and, taking advantage of, the proper steps to start, talking to some, major distribution companies, sales reps, other producer reps. So it took you 4 years, right, before you started writing the book, right? You already had experience. You had pretty much a database and a knowledge base of, what the proper steps are, right?
Yeah, I had a good idea of how the market worked. I learned a lot more through the process of writing the book. In that book, I interview one distributor at length, and I have questionnaires from about 8 others that we share that ended up in the last 2 chapters of the book. And I learned from that as I was writing the book, and then I actually rewrote the book to incorporate that knowledge a bit, although it wasn't that different from what I'd already written. It just fleshed out some parts I wasn't as sure of, because you can't really learn that market until you've been in a booth actually selling to buyers. That's the only real way to understand how that market works.
Yeah, and do you mind sharing like your first experience as far as like the first feature that you sold?
Yeah, sure. The first feature that I sold was actually, well, the first feature I got an LOI for was the second year I went to AFM, and we got an LOI from a company that I'm not going to name. They no longer exist, and they're great, nice people, but they kind of fleeced us, and that is how I learned about how to avoid being fleeced. So it was so we went there, we got that deal. I learned about the process of getting the deal, and then I went back the next year, got a better deal for a different film, and the next year I went with 5 completed films and got 11 sorry, I went with, I got 11 offers per film, which was a lot. Not a many,
Yeah,
very
which
many of
gave
them
you
were
leverage.
good,
I'm assuming, right? It
but
gave you some
yeah.
leverage in the in negotiating, right? If there's more
Yeah,
than
it does.
if there's multiple
The,
negotiations.
yeah, the 11 was a lot, and honestly, most of them were bad. So we didn't move on. Like most times now, you don't need that many. Most times when I'm negotiating for a client, I consider it great if we've gotten between 3 and 5 offers, and that's not uncommon if the film is good.
Yeah, and I'm very curious, right? Like, we all start off, my route to producing, was through, the old school way of, you paying your dues. I did 3 years as a production assistant, then 3 years as a grip, and then like 5 years in the AD department, which naturally got me into UPMing and line producing, and then eventually getting into producing and stuff like that. So at some point, during your going to school and then being in San Francisco, something must have clicked, right? Saying like, this is one of the most important, pieces to the puzzle to getting, getting your film funded, or actually, having some kind of recoupment, strategy to whoever invested, in the film, whether it's, the production company or investors or whatnot, So when did you start realizing that, distribution was probably, I don't know what you would rate it like in the scale of, the top 5 elements that you need to have in your business plan or in your strategy, but I'm assuming that's really, really high up there, man.
Yeah, it's probably, if we're not counting financing, it's probably the second most important, because really, even if you have distribution, if you don't have a marketing strategy, the distribution's not going to do you much good. So the more I think about it, the more actually having a market base and a target audience and a community to market to is as important, if not more important, than distribution. Because if you have that target audience in that market, you can use an aggregator and just sell it yourself.
Yeah.
That's not always a good idea. If you have like a $1 million feature, you probably don't want to do that, because you're probably just not going to be able to move enough units that way. But but if you've got a $50,000 film, it's something that you might want to consider, just because it is, from a sales agent's perspective, it can be very, very difficult to profitably sell a $50,000 film. Not impossible. I've done it, but it is it's difficult, and it's getting more difficult as time goes on. So I would say it's the second most important thing outside of marketing if we're talking about a business plan to raise financing, and maybe the third, because another thing you should be talking about is how you're structuring your financial mix and where your money's coming from, because it really shouldn't be all equity. If you're raising 100%, if you're raising 100% equity, you're doing it wrong. So I've lost the thread on the question.
No, I was the original question was like, when did that light bulb just click in your head, saying like, what, this is such an important piece of the puzzle that I need to put my energy in it and master it, get educated on it, because it could be the difference between having your film funded or having your film just make zero, no return whatsoever.
So yeah, part of that is that I had one really good teacher in film school who kind of drilled business into my head, and his name was Bill Brown. He may or may not be watching, but if he is, hello. So he started to drill that into my head, and then when I moved out to San Francisco, I started working for the Institute for International Film Finance, which is the educational arm of the Film Angels. And after about 6 months of working there, I went from running events for their San Francisco chapter to running events for their San Francisco, Vancouver, New York, and Los Angeles chapters, all at the same time. And then I realized I wasn't making enough money, so I went off and started my own thing.
Yeah.
But in the process there, was how, in the process of running those events, I really realized the importance of distribution and how it needed to be a part of the mix and how you needed to have a lead on it and how you were going to get it. Because the number one way films fail to make money is that they fail to actually go to market. Well, maybe number two. The number one way might be that they don't finish, but I don't think that's as big
really
anymore
nowadays. I mean, it's been a very long time since I heard a production falling short and not even get into post. I mean, obviously people do run out of money. Another thing that you can definitely speak on is that a lot of independent filmmakers don't consider the cost of putting a film in the market, which is the deliverables. They never set aside that money, and by that time you're already like a year and a half in, getting ready to finish your film, from writing the screenplay to filming the film, and then doing the editing. And by that time obviously most independent filmmakers are extremely exhausted, they're stretched financially, and then they get an interest from a distribution company, and they start talking about these things that we call deliverables, and they're like, oh wow, I've never set aside any money for that, and now I have to go in that whole looking for funding cycle again. I mean, it does happen where people run out of money, or their film becomes stagnant because they just can't afford the deliverables, so they can get into the market and potentially make a return.
So I would hope that doesn't happen, because the deliverables do have a cost, and it is something you do need to budget for, but it's not anywhere near as much as you spend making the film. It is. Yeah. I normally put aside around $5,000 for deliverables, and it's kind of a high estimate. But a standard QC run is around $1,000 to $1,500. And generally there will be some changes to make, but you'll have to do QC again. If you get through QC on the first time, good on you, that's great. Your total cost is $1,500. But if you have to make changes, you will have to pay for QC again, which will mean another $1,000 to $1,500, plus all the changes that you have to make. And at some point it can make more sense to just have the QC company make the changes.
Yeah, and most of the issues that we see on our end is the poor audio mix, poor edit. So sometimes you have to redo it. Like you have to restructure the whole, the whole sound mix, and that has, its price tag, and the same thing with editing. And I'm very curious, as far as your strategy, Ben. I mean, like, how important is a trailer and marketing materials, whether it's a spec movie poster, to really entice a distribution company to say, you know what, this has a lot of potential? And basically at least the way that I see it when I try to present something is when you have a trailer, the distribution company knows exactly who the market is.
So you want to have a good and accurate trailer to the movie, but you also don't want to spend an insane amount of time on it, because there's a good chance that the distributor is going to cut their own anyway. Yeah. So don't expect the trailer you cut to be the one that goes out with the film. It does happen. It's actually happened with me a couple times, but there's also a lot of times that the distributor is going to want to change the name, that they're going to want to change the poster significantly. There's a story about a movie that's coming out in June that I can't say yet, that is huge in name change and in the poster change. It's a complete rebranding of the movie, even though it's the same movie, and it's still somehow accurate, mostly. But but the changes are very, very different from what we expected. So, and that's pretty common. And that's something that can also happen on a territory basis.
Yeah, and that's something obviously that filmmakers have to be mature and realistic. That their little baby is going to have to change a little bit. And some people might be opposed to the poster being changed or the trailer, but at the end of the day, the distribution company is pretty much the final say. And granted, you're talking about a multi-million-dollar company that has, that's done tons of research, that has probably a marketing and research department. So I mean, obviously they their insights obviously extremely powerful, right? It's they're not necessarily saying it because they're taking a nab on your creativity. They just really really know this business,
And they look, most of the distributors I deal with don't make any money until the film is sold. So, and sometimes they'll actually pay us up front before they make money. So there's only so much you can do here. And you do have to trust them to a level. That's not to say that they're always correct.
Yeah.
Sometimes they are misguided. And sometimes that does have an impact on the film. And sometimes there's not a lot you can do about that once you've signed. It's disappointing, but it's true. You can have, most of the time when you sign with a distributor, the most you can do is say, is it possible to tweak this, this, and this? And they might say, nope, we're good. And then there's nothing else you can do. And it's frustrating sometimes, but it is true. And it's frustrating for me as a marketer as well.
Hey, and how you doing?
Hey, yeah.
Jeannie's pretty cool.
Yeah, she is.
And then, so when you were, I mean, obviously, like, is AFM the only market that you physically attend? Have you gone to any of the international markets or South by Southwest or Tribeca or Toronto?
As of right now, it's the only one I've been to, but that's likely to change this year.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at con. I'm not 100% on con, but if I don't, a good chance I'll go to NAPT next year in January. Just because I really think a lot of the future in this industry is more in television and episodic than it is in features, which is sad because I love features.
Yeah, I love features too.
Yeah, but I just, having spent a lot of time with boots on the ground here, it's, if you can make a 13-episode feature that actually has the same basic story world and isn't just stretched, pardon me, then that is something that you should do at this point. If you're spending more like 600 to $1 million on a 13-episode feature, it's a lot more likely you'll make your money back. But it's difficult to make that sale to some people because it's like, oh, why don't you just make a pilot and have them do the rest? That's not always the way it works if you're dealing with a sales agent as opposed to a regular agent.
So are we talking about just, the next 5 years, anything that's in cinema is pretty much just a tentpole kind of structure, something that's, has a franchise, obviously like comic book movies, like Marvel, DC, other features based on books. I mean, is there even, as independent filmmakers, is it even still worth it? I guess that's one of the questions I kind of want to get to. And like I said, I've been in this industry for 15 years. When I started off, we were still shooting 35 millimeter. So I saw that transition, from digital and, how, the consumption of content is extremely difficult. My daughter's, watching her shows now on her, iTouch, once in a while I might watch an episode or two on my laptop, but me personally, I love still watching it on TV and obviously going to the theaters and stuff like that. So that's a very important thing that you just brought up. And one of the things I want to encourage filmmakers, just don't live and breathe off of just one film. You have to start thinking like a company. You have to have other stuff in development. You have to have your web content. You have to have your TV content and other stuff that can brand into different things.
You're hitting on something that's very true. I'm actually doing a 5-hour workshop on lean filmmaking at the end of March in San Francisco, and it's all about how you can use lean startup principles to build an entertainment company. not making a single movie, but actually building a company. Because that's what you have to do in this day and age. You have to think of each project as a strategic piece of building a company and building an audience and a fan base and a brand. Because if you're not doing that, it's not going to work for you long term.
Yeah, that's one of the things too. Is like, you have to start looking at your film. Like, what else can exist outside of just that physical film? Whether it's, can it translate into a novel? Can it translate into a mobile game? Like, obviously, it depends on your genre.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things, one of my personal friends, Prema, she's working on this really cool, really cool animation film, and would it be possible that, that leapfrog, like that one thing that can possibly bring attention to a film might be, an adult coloring book, right? Or something.
Mm-hmm.
You see where I'm getting at, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what other financial outlets can live outside of just the physical film, which is only an hour and 30 minutes. It's only, it has its own life cycle, which is, whether it gets a theater release or VOD release, and whatnot. But like, is there any other, people need to start thinking like a business, branching out, like, where else can this world that I created live outside of just the physical film?
Mm-hmm. If you wanted to say that in the canonical transmedia terminology, it would be to what other pieces can you add to your story world and actually that will help bolster your main product. And yeah, you're thinking the right way.
Yeah, that was actually one of the courses that I got from the Producer Foundry. You had a guest that was just specifically focusing on transmedia. You also had a guest, one of the people, I believe it was an entertainment attorney, that was speaking about, how to pitch to investors. And it was just, I highly recommend anybody at least get those courses. And I also got Debbie's course on UPMing, Debbie Brubaker, who's an amazing human being. I've followed her work for a number of years. We actually have mutual acting friends, and obviously, she's worked with some really iconic, filmmakers, and once again, it's at first, I wrote this article, on how, people have, certain strengths in their personality, right? And it's very hard for, creative people to think, in business terms, right? To start, having these, projections and, elements that you need to have to increase your likelihood of getting, distribution, so you can, continue, being a filmmaker, right? Because if you're on your third film and you're still not making a profit, man, I mean, it's just simple math. You're not going to be able to make a living.
No, you're right. You need to think about how the money's coming back in, and you also need to be careful about how you spend the money to begin with, especially when you're starting out. You mentioned Debbie Brubaker. I don't know if you know this, Jesus, but I'm actually doing a 6-part live stream over 6 weeks with her starting tomorrow.
Wow.
So yeah, that is, and we're doing it all about. Where she'll be going over the basics of being a UPM, and then I'll be showing you how you do those basics on production next. So that is the biggest thing there, and it's looking really good. It's a free Facebook live stream, so I definitely encourage you to check that out. But
that's going to start tomorrow.
Yeah, it starts tomorrow at, I believe, 6 p.m. Pacific.
Yeah, so absolutely. I'll share it with the group, and I'll share it with my email list as well. And definitely, I want to attend. Because Debbie, anybody that doesn't know that, she's pretty much a living legend in the independent world. As far as being a line producer, and she also produces, and she's a UPM. And it's such an important role in your crew. Somebody who's going to do your budgets, your shooting schedules, negotiating with vendors, and all that good stuff. Somebody has to be that control center of making sure everything's going according, pretty much going according to plan.
Yeah, no, Debbie is just fantastic, and it's great to actually be friends with her and be able to just put in a call when you actually need a question answered. But and I understand she can't do that for everybody, so that's why we're trying to actually give the opportunities like this webinar so you can actually learn from her wealth of experience in a way that is accessible and free. So yeah.
Now, Ben, let's start talking about like what a filmmaker can do. Once you have a script, whether you option it or you write it yourself, and you get the proper coverage, you get professional coverage on the script, and then you start.
Thank you for saying that.
No, it's extremely important. It's. Go ahead, Ben.
Sorry, I was about to say the same thing you are, so I'll let you say it.
No, it's just extremely important to have coverage on your screenplay. Because there's a certain bar that your script has to hit to get actors and directors excited so they can make a commitment on your project, right? And also it shows a producer, an investor, an executive producer, a sales rep, a development executive that your screenplay has it's viable, right? Because it's already gone through a process of being and for people who don't know what script coverage is, it's basically it's an industry professional that makes an assessment on your screenplay to see and there's certain kind of like bullet points to focus on the strings, and it just shows a certain maturity when you go to that process. And also encourages it makes producers extremely more comfortable that you went through that process, right? And basically what I was going to ask you, Ben, is like what other elements, like, okay, we have your screenplay, right? It's already written, you got in some script coverage. What should they start doing as soon as they have that material, that script solid, when it comes to distribution? What are some steps that they can start already considering and kind of like fluffing up the script so people in the distribution angle and the distribution side of production start paying attention?
So it's very, very difficult to get somebody on the distribution side to pay attention when all you have is a script. If what you're looking for is a pre-sale, there are 3 general things you need. The first is you need a known director with a track record who's done at least 3 films in a similar genre to your film. The second is recognizable name talent. And if you get the recognizable name talent, then you're going to be much more likely to actually get some level of the pre-sale. Now, it's possible that the only thing that the pre-sale will cover is the payment to that talent. And the third is that your film needs to not be execution dependent. You can't be trying to make Moonlight and expect a pre-sale.
Yeah.
You can be trying to make the Expendables 4 and get a pre-sale. So that's basically the easiest way to illustrate what execution dependence is. And if you don't have all of those things, the best you can really hope for from a distributor is a letter of intent. And a letter of intent basically says that once the film's done, I'll take a look, and if it meets all my criteria, I'll consider distributing it. That's essentially it. It's a very escapable document on both sides. A lot of sales agents and distributors don't necessarily like saying that because they believe that a letter of intent is something that they need to be careful about giving out because otherwise they'll dilute their brand too much, which is true, and I agree with. I've actually recently started offering letters of intent for projects I'm interested in, but can't afford services I offer of trying to get a letter of intent from somebody with a bit more clout than me. So I will occasionally give out a letter of intent, but I don't give out too many because I don't want to overstretch my brand. But a letter of intent can be something that's very good on both sides because it helps distributors keep things in their pipeline so they always know they've got something coming out, and it helps you actually raise funding, because if you can actually prove to an investor that you have distribution covered, as long as you make the film well, then you're in a much better position.
And it's almost kind of like a purchase order, right? In a sense, like, if you get a letter of intent from a distribution company, I mean, they can't necessarily give you. And one thing that I've learned throughout my process is that certain distribution companies focus on one particular market. Whether it's limited theatrical release, whether it's physical DVDs, or whether it's just VOD, cable. So that's another thing that we can jump into. Is a distribution company that as soon as they see your trailer, they know exactly where it's going to probably do the best at, whether, it's going to do a lot better like on iTunes or Amazon Prime, or if it's going to do a lot better in physical DVDs, like, Redbox would be a perfect example.
So most of the buyers I deal with less, unless they're specifically for like a specific pay TV outlet like Starz, Showtime, HBO, or whatever, then they are unlikely to do one specific media. Now, at least at the lower budget levels, and when I say lower budget levels, I mean anything under about $2 million. A lot of times they'll buy the entire all rights for that territory. So like if you're dealing with a North American buyer who will cover US and Canada, they'll take all rights for that territory, and then they'll monetize all the ones they possibly can. If they're taking all rights for that territory, and you have a really solid product, you really should be getting a minimum guarantee from them on that. Or if they're not giving you a minimum guarantee, they may be offering screens instead. So you might be getting some number of theatrical screens, because they have some way of getting into theaters that they don't actually have to pay for, but will add significant amounts of revenue to your film. And I've done deals like that before. So those are the two basic ways you can get something out of it. If your film is not, if you just can't find a pay upfront offer, you might be forced to take a revenue share offer, and this is becoming more and more common, which is one reason that I'm advising you move more towards television. That the sales agents in all sorts of different territories for films under 250 or 200,000 that don't have recognizable name talent, the standard, even for international territories, is not pay up front, pay license fee, pay MG. It's revenue share deal. So then the revenue share goes to the distributor, then to the sales agent, then to the if there's a producer's rep, and then to the filmmaker themselves. And honestly, I know that having that producer's rep there seems like an expensive thing, but if the producer's rep's done their job and is only taking about 10%, which is about standard for connecting to sales agents and negotiating with sales agents, I'm going to say that again, and negotiating with sales agents, because not all of us do, then it's something that will actually end up making the pie significantly bigger for the filmmaker. So it does make sense to pay that piece to us.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is there's a reason why somebody specializes in their particular department, in their particular field, because they can leapfrog a filmmaker's career, in that sense that you don't like, obviously, like when I started off, there weren't a lot of resources or even books on how to properly sell your film. It was just I sent out like over 100 emails, and we got a bite from somebody. But I think one of the reasons that we got them excited was the trailer was really well done, and we had some really good marketing materials. But once again, you don't want to spend another freaking year trying to sell the film when a producer rep can do it like in a way faster and way more profitable way than if you were to do it independently, or you do it on your own, just out of whether you don't have the money or it's an ego thing,
So there's another thing on this. You're right. A producer's rep has the contacts. Like, if I watch a film, I don't make an offer letter unless I have at least 3 places I can take it to.
Yeah.
And once we've negotiated our deal, I get started the next day. And I just say, okay, here are the 3 people I'm emailing. Here they are. Let's try to get it placed by the next market so that it has a market premiere at, I mean, if this were 4 weeks ago, I would have said a market premiere at EFM. If it were today, I'd say, let's wait till after EFM, and I'll hit them up about 2 to 3 weeks after EFM, after they've had a chance to close all their deals for my EFM. And then we will say, and then we'll try to get a market premiere at Con. And I've done that before. That is so if you go about it, there's a good chance that you'll end up getting a bad deal because you don't know where and how to negotiate it. And you don't know the things to ask for that you can, because you might not be able to negotiate an MG. If your film is under 250,000, you don't have name talent, you probably can't get an MG. Just sorry, it's true. And but that doesn't mean that there aren't ways you can negotiate to get paid from the first sale. And I don't say any of these publicly just because if you ask for it incorrectly, it can hurt you more than help you. So I keep this one back for myself, partially because I can't give away everything, and also partially because if you ask for it wrong, it can tank a deal. So those are the so basically, if you want to have a producer's rep, you've got to do diligence on them, but a good producer's rep can help you really increase the size of your film. And also, you should not be hesitant about contacting a producer's rep early on, possibly even before your theatrical run. And I'm not going to name what film this is, but recently I had a film where it had already done its theatrical run. It had been going out for a little bit before they contacted me. I saw the film, loved the film, still love the film. And I ended up making an offer letter, and I ended up talking to a buyer at AFM. He loved the film. He made an offer for North American, and we took that offer eventually. After that offer was taken, he ended up saying, so I showed this to my buyer at Sundance, to my friend at Sundance, who's a festival programmer. And all he could say is, why did they not submit? I mean, we would have taken this film. If I'd seen it, I would have taken this film. This is an amazing film. Thing is, they did submit. They submitted last year. They submitted in 2016 instead of in 2017 for the 2018 Sundance.
Mm-hmm.
If he had actually had this same buyer on when he submitted to Sundance, he would have gotten into Sundance. And that is a huge
difference
for a film. So that and a huge career difference. So I hate to say this to filmmakers, but a lot of these high-level festivals are just as much about who you know as your film. So having a producer's rep or having the right sales team on at an early stage can actually help you get in.
And like I keep on mentioning, man, that there people have to start thinking that they can do it all themselves, because it's like I said, this is one of the most complicated, business structures that you can think of. I can't think of anything else that relies on just so many different pieces, aligning properly so this film can, your film that you invested, years and years on can, either potentially, launch a career, make a profit, or it's going to be a lot easier for you to make your second film because you already have, a successful film that, that did pretty well in the market. And so that's the thing that people they need to start considering is like start building your team early, right? Like if I just finish my script, obviously, I'm still working on either finding a producer or somebody that can focus on the financing. But there's no reason why at least, I can, send a quick email to Ben Yennie and say like, hey, Ben, this is the script that I currently have. I know it's extremely early, but, once we get to a point where we can bring you on, because we need somebody that just specifically focuses on getting the best possible deal for this film,
Mm-hmm. And part of that is also having the best possible brand and the best possible marketing, and having all of that stuff figured out early is a big thing that someone like me can help you with. I normally only come on a strict commission basis for when I am representing a completed film. That's about the only time I will work solely on commission. But I do work on early stage projects as well, and a lot of it is about helping figure out financial mixes, figuring out branding, figuring out marketing strategy, figuring out all of these other sorts of really important things at an early stage. And I do it for generally part upfront and part deferred or performance dependent. And performance dependent is normally for packaging tasks. So like if you want an LOI from a sales agent, and I only offer this service at my discretion because there's only so many contacts I have and there's only so much I can talk to each one of them. But I will actually take some small upfront payment and then some generally larger payment if I'm successful in getting you an LOI. And I also do the same thing for trying to attach recognizable name talent and sometimes directors. So those sorts of packaging tasks each have their own upfront payment and each have a performance dependent payment that if for some reason it doesn't work, you don't pay the performance dependent part. But if it's something like a business plan, I will defer part of that, where I'll charge probably about half up front and I'll defer half of it to when you've hit some financing milestone.
Yeah.
So there are ways to work with someone like me. And I haven't talked to Jesus about this, but I assume Jesus has some sort of similar plan on that. That you can work with early stage filmmakers to help build their plan and help set them up for success. But if you're working that early, you can't do it on commission because you can't plan getting paid a year out.
And that's the thing that's so important too, Ben, is it's pretty much like a really solid, producer rep, at least in my opinion, is somebody that can give you a really great, can give you clarity on a forecast on what your film can do. And I would love to go back to that example that you mentioned about that filmmaker who could have gone and premiered at, Sundance. If he would have contacted you as soon as he'd done, finished his film, he had a trailer, you would have, navigated him and given him the advice like, dude, this film is actually Sundance worthy. We need to go this route, because once again, you have the experience, you have, you have the business relationships with the distribution companies that you can give a real solid roadmap. I guess at the end of the day, it's a really solid roadmap on, these are your best options to continue having a career as a filmmaker and making a living off of it.
So I will be completely honest here and say that most people do not get into Sundance. Most people will never get into Sundance. 99% of filmmakers or more will never get into Sundance. And if your plan is to get to Sundance and get a distribution out of going to Sundance, it's not going to work, even if you go through me. This one just happened to be a really big set of kind of random circumstances that ended up working out, that would have ended up working out in this filmmaker's favor. But there was no way he could have known that going in. And the big thing that I'm saying here is, if you want to do the festival route, you really should have somebody who understands marketing and distribution on your team when you're doing your festival run. Because it's not like getting into certain festivals will help you to some level, but you're going to be more likely to get into the ones that will really help you if you have somebody who has connections there on your team already. And that's just the way of it.
But nonetheless, I mean, you watch a trailer and you know exactly which companies you would present this to, you know, based on, you know, production value, based on the talent, and so you have a general idea of where it could possibly go, just based on, you know, just from experience. Once again, like, you know, I can look at a trailer from a filmmaker and I know more or less, and we can talk about this kind of briefly if you want, you know, distribution.
So yeah.
Or similar to, you know,
you're cutting out, so if I'm talking over you, I'm not trying to.
No, that's fine. Can you hear me now? Testing 1 2. I think you're pausing, Ben. Let me see if I can refresh this real quick. Can anybody in the group just give me a quick one, just to make sure you can hear me still? Let me. Nope, got an internet. Having a minor little issue. We're working on it right now. I'm going to see if I can get Ben back on. Okay, no, people can still hear me and see me. Okay, here we go. We invited Ben back, so give us a quick second, and he should be back on. And if anybody in the group has any questions for Ben, I'm pretty sure he'll be more than happy to answer us. And we're trying to get Ben back on. There he is.
Hey, sorry about that.
No problem whatsoever, sir.
So yeah, where were we?
I think we were discussing. You were still talking about, you know, that filmmaker from Sundance, and I believe you were mentioning, you know, the importance or maybe the overhype of being in a prestigious film festival.
So yeah, the biggest thing is if you're working with the right producers rep or the right distribution company, they're going to be able to help you with your festival run. They're not going to be able. It's not like they'll offer you a specifically better deal because you got into certain festivals. They'll actually be able to help you get in to better festivals. And this is not something that's true of every sales agent or distributor, but the ones you really want to work with, it is. And also, the biggest thing is, even if you get into a lot of small festivals, it's not really going to change your distribution offer. It's not going to have any effect on it really whatsoever. So there's not a lot. So there is potentially a lot to lose by not contacting a sales agent, producer's rep, or distributor early. And there's a lot and there's not a lot to lose by doing it early. Unless you get into Sundance, which you have less than a 1% chance of doing. So that is and again, never count on getting into Sundance. And honestly, a good sales agent might be able to help. Might. So yeah, those are the biggest things in terms of figuring out when to contact a producer's rep or a sales agent. Don't think you need a strong festival run to contact them, and don't think that anything other than tier 1 festivals will change your offer, because it's not going to.
Cool. And Ben, would you like to discuss? I know we briefly. One second, I'm hearing some feedback. Okay. I know we briefly spoke about, you wanted to speak about, the current state of film financing and the current state of the industry, how everything is changing. I just recently came across this film funding company that works on a cryptocurrency kind of angle, and obviously this is extremely new. So obviously, this is, there's definitely more options, I guess, for coming up with some kind of financial structure for your film. But you're definitely the expert, and we would love to hear your opinion on that.
So I know a decent amount about film financing. I know an all right amount about investing in general, and I'm somewhat versed in the stock market in general, investing as well, and less versed in blockchain and cryptocurrency. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to speak on all of these things in the next minute, so I'm just going to take that as a disclaimer, and I'm also going to say that I am not a financial analyst. I am not an expert, and this should by no means be considered advice on whether or not you should buy a certain sort of investment or anything on those. That is, I'm saying that for legal reasons more than anything. But basically, I think blockchain, which is the underlying technology for cryptocurrency, is more useful in things other than straight finance. I think that blockchain has a really big potential for use in distribution, but I'm not entirely sure what that looks like as of right now. I think that the current state of the film distribution market is that as more and more content is being produced on a yearly basis, it's going to be harder and harder to get any real money for each of these projects. And unless you're spending almost nothing on it, the traditional sales agent distribution model will be very difficult to maintain for anything under $200,000 in the next 5 years. There are this year at AFM, there were about 600 fewer buyers than there were the year before.
Oh,
and
wow.
There were only 1,800 the year before. So that's a pretty big drop. And it's a pretty... it's something that you do have to be aware of, and it's something that you have to pay attention to. But I'm not sure where this film market landscape is going for distribution in the future. So I really think filmmakers and content creators really need to establish relationships with both their core audience through social media, as well as with people who can actually just help take the film directly to the outlets where it can be seen later on, be they aggregators or people who have connections to places like Netflix or any of those SVO or Stars or any of those SVOD platforms, or pay TV channels, because each of the pay TV channels also has an SVOD platform. But so I'd say that's the next biggest thing that you should be focusing on, and you need to be engaging with your audience at an early state. And I think that's going to be more and more important over the next 5 to 10 years. Now, in terms of finance, in terms of understanding that, in terms of understanding where money comes from, you have to look at where most investors keep their money. And most investors have some money in the stock market right now. So if you're raising money, you have to have an understanding of what's going on in the stock market. Now, again, I am nowhere near qualified to give advice on what to do regarding the stock market, but I can give you my opinion of where it is and my non-expert opinion of where it is and what's going to happen with it in the near future. There's nothing wrong to stop me from doing that. And my non-expert opinion on the stock market right now is that we are in a massive bubble. And I think we are going to be in a bear market in the very, very near future. And I think that it would be that if I were an investor, I'm not an investor. If I were an investor, I would be trying to divest from parts of the stock market, especially indexed mutual funds, and put that money into some place that is less likely to be hit by this bubble. And that means startups, that means independent film, that means places that are generally higher risk investments, but right now are comparably lower risk because the stock market is such a bubble. And I think I've answered all of your questions on that, but that is my opinion of the general state of the market.
So what real options, or where should people's filmmakers' energy be at then? If I mean, there's just so many variables, right? I keep on hearing a reverb. Hold on 1 second.
That's why I have headphones in. But yeah.
I tried it the first couple of broadcasts and I didn't have any issues whatsoever. But so what other options do filmmakers have? You know, I mean, there are just so many variables, you know, whether you're pitching to an investor or you're pitching to a development executive, or you're trying to go, you know, some kind of, you know, crowdfunding. And, you know, ideally you would like to have, you know, different sources of income, right? You know, not 100% relying just on equity, right? Because it could, you know, that's a lot of, you know, money, you know, whether your film's, you know, under $1 million or a little bit higher. You know, if you're trying to shoot a film just 100% on equity, then, you know, that can be extremely, you know, dangerous, you know, to an investor, right? Because, you know, there's just so many elements that go into play to having a successful film. So I guess my question is, you know, and this really goes back to focusing on the business, focusing on your energy, which, you know, has limits as well. I mean, are independent filmmakers, based on the information that you just gave, are they better off just going directly to the source, you know, just pitching to studios, pitching to networks, or should they just still take that risk of trying to produce their own content, you know, independently?
So you'll need an agent to pitch to development executives. If you don't have an agent, then you'll need to go a different route. You can try to get an agent, but that's not an easy thing to do unless you've actually really produced something that's got legs. So I would say, once you actually have enough of a network to make calls to sales agencies, distributors, and all of those people, then it's much, much, much easier to get an agent than it would be otherwise. So that's one thing. The next thing is, you need to not look at any of these as an either or. You need to look at all. You need to be looking at raising funding from all of these sources. And one of the easiest places to raise funding, if your state allows for it, or if your state has a good incentive, is from your own state's tax incentive. If you can get approved for your own state's tax incentive, that can often mean between 20 and 30% of your budget already raised that you can then take to certain banks and get as a security, so that money is liquid. At that point, that's much less risk for the investor. Another thing you should really be doing if you're a filmmaker right now, if you're any level of a filmmaker right now, you should start applying for grants. If you have a project, apply for a grant through any of the relevant granting associations. The reason I say this is you're not going to get the grant the first time you apply. But you'll be significantly more likely to get it next year when you apply again. And even if you don't get it the year after, you'll be, again, significantly more likely to get it the third year you apply. It takes that long to really get these sorts of grants. And once you start getting those grants, you can start going back and getting more money from these grants. So that's how you raise money in grant writing, is continuing to apply to the same grants over and over and over. And it does take 2 to 3 years to get your first grant. So that is one way that you should be going, because especially if you're a woman filmmaker, if you're a minority filmmaker, if you're any level of those, you really, really, really need to be applying for grants, because there's a lot more funding available for that than there is for someone like myself, who is a straight white male. And I don't mean to get into that crude demography there, but it does matter in grant applications.
And just to clarify too, Ben, I mean, and I'll just show my ignorance. Obviously, I don't know everything as well, but I've always thought of grants. Obviously, they work extremely well for documentaries. If you don't mind clearing that up, if also, you know, features can still apply for grants, or is it just really a documentary kind of short film kind of structure?
It depends on where you're going and what granting association you're going with, and what the criteria for the grant are. If you, it's easier to get grants for documentaries. It's easier to get grants for shorts. You can get grants for narratives if you go to the right places and write the right grant. You have to have some reason that your voice needs to be heard. And again, this is why I was breaking down the demography issues there. It's easier to get grants, and there's more grants available for people with distinct and unique voices. And a lot of times that does mean minority groups. And that is why, if you are a member of a minority group, it's probably more important that you apply for grants, because it is more like there's more sources of funding available for you through that than there is for somebody who is not a member of a minority group.
Yeah, so you have to structure your financing in a way, like, you know, whether it's 5% from crowdfunding, another 5% from grants, and then you have your film incentives, possibly, you know, if it's the right project, some kind of pre-sales. Also, product placement can be a serious option as well if it's played like in a regional, local angle, you know, because most independent films or more smaller companies, they can't afford, you know, huge advertising, you know, agencies to promote their product, but they can definitely afford a few $1,000s here, a few $1,000s there, and it's just like this whole pie that, you know, you're trying to, you know, that one particular person has to like focus on to, you know, have a proper budget, because that's another thing too. Like if your film is not properly budgeted, you're not gonna hit that potential that could possibly hit, because you just don't have those resources. Whether it's, you know, talent, whether it's, you know, a solid, you know, first AC, you know, that, you know, comes with this price tag, and, you know, production value and whatnot, you know. So that's always something very hard to consider. And I once posted, you know, this poll where I asked, you know, filmmakers, is it harder to write a superb script, or is it harder to raise money for an independent film? And I think the majority said writing a solid screenplay is definitely harder, but I don't think they've gone through that motion of really trying to finance a project. You know, it takes a while. You know, as a matter of fact, on average, the films that, you know, that we produce, you know, they usually take about a year.
I'm not surprised that it takes about a year to finance. And actually, if it only takes about a year to finance, you're actually pretty good at your job. So you're right in that you have to get money from all of these different sources. You didn't mention debt. And debt can be a very crucial part of all of this, whether it is to back one of the other letters that you have. Like, most states don't give you cash up front to shoot your movie. You'll need to take a loan out against the tax incentive. So that's one potential way for debt. If you get a pre-sale, the sales agent isn't giving you money up front. They're giving you a letter that says that once it's done, they'll give you money. So you need to take a loan out against that letter. And you can take these loans out either privately or publicly from a bank. And not all banks will do them, but some will. And then there's also the notion of unbacked debt, which is scary and also known as gap debt, and often insanely high interest. And unless you really, really need it, you shouldn't take it. And the one instance I can see where it makes sense to take it, and it only makes a little bit of sense, is if you are in if you've already completed principal photography on the film and you've just run out of money and you need to finish the film so you can get something back. At that point, taking out gap loans through something like slated.com is generally a viable option, although they'll still be higher interest than you would like, but doing it through slated.com tends to end up with lower interest than if you took it to a bank. So yeah, that's kind of where it is.
And Ben, like, what would be the number one advice you would get, that you would give to a filmmaker when it comes to the business of making a film, and how and I'm assuming that your angle is going to still be, through a distribution angle, but what's something that most people are not, it's not even in their, in their brain yet, because it's, they just want to focus on the film.
Focusing on the audience that it's going to is probably a big thing, and making sure that you remain true to that audience and that there is some level of connection point to that audience for when you're done. And if you're making a small independent film, you need to be a part of that audience. You don't just need to do research on them. You need to actually become ingrained in that community so that they're excited when your movie comes out. And you need to actually spend some time in Facebook and LinkedIn groups talking about the pains of this community. And if you do that, you're going to be more likely to make an authentic film anyway. So everybody wins. It does take time, but you'd be surprised about the benefits, both to your film and your business, as well as to yourself personally, for becoming truly involved in these communities.
That's awesome. And Ben, I know your time's valuable, and I just wanted to ask you one final question. How can a filmmaker get a hold of you, and what specifically services or guidance that you offer, to independent filmmakers?
So there are a couple ways to get a hold of me. If you want to book a call, I generally use a service called Clarity, which is a fee-based service, but it will allow you to book a call with me directly. And there will be some fees involved, and I will get most of those fees, but but I'll be able to answer your questions directly. Another way is via the Submit tab on my website. If you go to theguerrillarep.com/submit, I take submissions on all stages of projects. And if you want to reach out to me about anything, the Submit tab is generally a good way to go, just because because it keeps everything in one place, and it's all the information I would need for whatever stage of film you're at. Then the other way you can kind of stay more in touch with what I'm doing is to become a patron on me. I have a Patreon that helps keep me writing a lot of different blogs. Right now I'm turning out 2 blogs a week, and I'm actually going to be doing a podcast starting soon. So if you support on Patreon, you'll get a lot of great perks around that, and you'll also have more access to me than the average person, because once we hit a certain threshold, we'll actually be doing monthly live streams where all of the questions come from patrons. And then of course there's Twitter, on Twitter at the Guerrilla Rep, on Facebook through Guerrilla Rep Media, which I believe is facebook.com/the Guerrilla Rep, and LinkedIn. I accept most people who add me on LinkedIn. So I think that's a lot of different ways.
Yeah, definitely. So you definitely have there's definitely a direct access to get a hold of you and start inquiring about your services. And that like, once again, I can't stress enough how important a producer rep can give you clarity and a proper roadmap, to have the best possible deal that you can possibly have, man. Because at the end of the day, there's so many first-time filmmakers, but you'll never hear them making a second or third, practically, basically having a career, right? It's extremely difficult to have to master a craft or a skill, whether you're a grip or an AC or an AD, and to consistently, get hired because you're really good at your job, right? At the end of the day, we want to be in a position where we're constantly producing great content, because we have that track record, we have that experience. And I think part of that puzzle is having a really great team, and having people specialize in one specific, aspect of this crazy thing that we call film, man.
Sounds good. Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jesus.
Absolutely, Ben, and I look forward to hearing more stuff from you. And once again, guys, just feel free to contact Ben. Go to his website, www.theguerrillarep.com, and I'm gonna post your link and also a link to your book on our group as well, man. Thank you so much, Ben. I really appreciate your time, sir.
No problem.
Thank you, buddy.